Tonight we step into the shadows of history to look at the lives of men who wore the papal crown for reasons far from guiding or protecting souls. Instead, their actions were about power, greed, and deception. From wild indulgences within Vatican walls to secret pacts with killers, these notorious popes serve as a reminder that those seated on the throne of St. Peter have not always been shining examples of faith. Some were dictators, others followed twisted desires, a few were ruthless, hiding their true natures behind their robes. Before we continue, if you find these stories intriguing, please show your support by liking and, if you wish, subscribing. Tell us where you're joining from and what time you're listening. While some of our stories have a calming effect, tonight's tale promises to be far from dull. Lower the lights, let the soft hum of a fan set the scene, and let's journey through these chapters together. Let's begin with Pope John the XII, often called the Boy Pope of Sin. At just 18, he was handed control of the Western Church, the most influential religious position imaginable. This young man, originally named Octavian, became pope in 955, largely due to the political power of his father, Alberic of Spoleto, who promoted his own son's rise before his own passing. But rather than being remembered for spiritual devotion, John XII's papacy became infamous for scandal, violence, and unchecked desires. To John XII, being pope was more entertainment than a sacred duty. According to records from the time, he turned the Lateran Palace, the official papal residence, into a place of vice and pleasure, welcoming sex workers where prayers should have filled the air. Precious objects meant for worship were sold off to fund his lavish pursuits, and instead of spreading the Christian message, he was said to toast ancient gods during raucous gatherings and bet alongside church leaders. His era wasn't just marked by moral collapse, but by political instability. He made enemies, upsetting important allies like Otto, Holy Roman Emperor. When John tried to negotiate secretly with Otto's rivals, it resulted in Otto entering Rome and demanding an investigation. The charges brought against John XII were shocking: corruption, murder, incest, and even calling on evil spirits. Though removed from power, he quickly regained his office with the support of angry crowds in Rome, only to seek revenge, harming his critics, executing oppositional bishops, and sinking back into his old ways. John XII's story came to a sudden end in 964, dying as unexpectedly and disgracefully as he lived. One tale claims he was fatally struck by a jealous husband who found him with his wife. Others say he simply suffered a deadly stroke in the midst of adultery. However it happened, John XII's brief life left behind not just disappointment, but great shame, a stain on the papacy that history has never fully washed away. We now turn to Pope Benedict IX, who holds the unlikely title of the pope who sold not just his soul, but the papacy itself. If John XII was the most immoral youthful pope, Benedict IX was arguably the strangest and most corrupt. Astonishingly, he wore the crown not once, but 3 different times. Benedict IX, born Theophylactus of Tusculum, rose to the papal throne for the first time around 1032, placed there as a very young man by his powerful family. Stories say his time as pope was marked by shame. He was accused of terrible deeds, including sexual crimes and dark practices. Reports describe wild parties held inside the Vatican, and the public's anger grew to the point that even a city used to corruption demanded his removal. Yet Benedict cared little about repentance. He wanted pleasure. When an uprising forced him out, he returned, twice more. But his most infamous act came when, in an unprecedented move, he openly sold the papal title for gold to his own godfather, the priest John Gratian, who became Pope Gregory VI, reportedly hoping to bring stability. The scandal this caused was so severe it plunged the church into deep crisis, and Benedict tried to reclaim his throne afterward, setting up a situation where 3 individuals all claimed to be pope at once. The confusion became so costly that Emperor Henry III was forced to convene a council to fix the problem. All 3 popes were dismissed. Benedict was excommunicated multiple times, depending on which group held power in Rome. He remains known not only as one of the most reviled popes, but also one of the most bizarre, greedy, and shameless. The man who treated St. Peter's chair like a merry-go-round, up for sale to the highest bidder, Rome has never forgotten. Next comes Pope Alexander VI, the crown jewel of corruption from the Borgia family. If one name stands out in discussions of church scandals, it is the Borgia name. Rodrigo Borgia, who became Pope Alexander VI in 1492, didn't merely bring shame. He became the very symbol of it. His rise to power was paved with bribes and political deals, not spiritual kindness. The 1492 papal election became legendary for its secret agreements and expensive gifts. Once pope, Alexander filled key positions with his relatives, focusing not on guiding souls but ensuring Borgia dominance. Openly acknowledging several children, including Cesare and Lucrezia, he watched as they became famous for their own web of rumors and legends. Cesare more like a crime boss than clergy, and Lucrezia often accused, rightly or wrongly, of dark and twisted schemes. Alexander himself was no more innocent. He held extravagant gatherings inside the Vatican, with one notorious evening, known as the Banquet of Chestnuts, where many women were brought to entertain guests while he allegedly observed. He sold high offices to whoever could pay, turning the church into a marketplace, with faith itself bought and sold. Surprisingly, Alexander was still an effective administrator. He improved church lands, introduced reforms, and encouraged art. But no achievement could erase the legacy of scandal. He died in 1503, and rumors suggest poisoning was behind his end, perhaps the result of his own dark plotting. Even in burial, his body was in such poor condition it could not fit his casket. Today, Alexander VI is remembered by many as the most scandalous pope, transforming the Vatican into a court of ambition, passion, and deadly whispers. Some papal blunders are remembered for money or pleasure, but what Pope Stephen VI did was so grim and bizarre, it still shocks. It is known as the Corpse Trial, a truly unique event. In 897, while Rome was riven by rivalries, Pope Stephen, supported by a powerful Roman family, set out to destroy the reputation of his predecessor, Pope Formosus, who, by then, was dead. Unbelievably, Formosus's body was pulled from its grave, dressed in full papal robes, and set up on a throne to stand trial in the basilica. Charges included false oaths and gaining the papacy unrightfully. A church aide was made to answer for the corpse, while Stephen's accusations rang out. The dead pope's body swayed in its seat until Stephen declared him guilty, stripped him of his sacred vestments, cut off his blessing fingers, and had the remains thrown into the river. This grotesque event was meant to erase Formosus's influence and let new supporters rise. But this spectacle created chaos, not order. Rome erupted in protests. Stephen was later jailed and killed by enemies in revenge. Later popes tried to erase this event, giving Formosus another burial and ruling out such trials in the future. Yet, Pope Stephen VI is not remembered for his faith or leadership, but for parading a corpse in judgment, a moment that turned the Vatican into a stage for tragedy. Even in death, popes were not spared from church politics. While others hid wrongdoings with charm or distractions, Pope Urban VI had no such disguise. Starting in 1378, his papacy was defined by hostility, distrust, and open violence. Cardinals, worried by unrest in Rome, chose Bartolomeo Prignano, an Italian, to calm the city, but soon regretted their choice. Urban's temper, suspicion, and harshness quickly surfaced. He dismissed advice, insulted his council publicly, and even beat staff for mistakes. Suspicious of plots, Urban imprisoned several cardinals, subjecting them to torture. Their cries were said to echo inside Vatican walls. Some died slow deaths in prison, while 5 were executed outright. His instability led many to view his election as improper. A group of cardinals left Rome and selected a competing pope in Avignon, Clement VII, sparking the Western Schism. For nearly 4 decades, Europe was torn between 2, sometimes 3, competing popes, fragmenting Christian unity. Urban refused to make peace, isolating himself and relying on loyal but often cruel followers. As he became more erratic and friendless, Rome was destabilized, and his harsh rule left an ugly legacy. Dying unloved in 1389, Urban VI is remembered less for the schism than for his own anger and violence, the cause of much of the crisis that followed, a tyrant in holy robes whose shadow remains. When Giovanni de' Medici took the name Pope Leo X in 1513, he wasn't stepping into a sacred duty, but into luxury. Born to one of Florence's richest families, he had lived like a prince well before donning the tiara. Under his reign, the Vatican transformed into a festival of art and extravagance, filled with endless banquets, sparkling treasures, and masterpieces by artists like Raphael. Pageantry and poetry thrived, but beneath this gleaming surface was disaster. Leo depleted church funds to support his lavish tastes. When the money was gone, he allowed the sale of indulgences, documents sold to reduce punishment for sins. Priests traveled, promising that a coin in the donation box would release the soul of a loved one from suffering. The plan worked. Money poured into Rome, but so did anger and unrest. In 1517, a German monk named Martin Luther had enough. He nailed his protest to the church door in Wittenberg, calling out both indulgences and corruption. Leo dismissed him, thinking Luther just an unruly German who would come to his senses. But Luther persisted, and Leo responded by cutting him off from the church, a move that backfired. The Protestant Reformation erupted, and European Christianity splintered forever. Leo VI treated the church as a stage and himself as the main actor, never seeing the deepening cracks beneath him. He died in 1521, deeply in debt, not grasping the true consequences of his actions. History remembers less the beauty he fostered, and more the division he caused, by pride, luxury, and turning forgiveness into something that could be bought and sold. Long before the famous Borgias or Medici, another pope set the example for corruption, Sergius III, whose rule began what came to be called the rule of harlots, or pornocracy. Sergius became pope in 904 through violence, eliminating competitors in the deadly games for power that gripped Rome. For him, the church was not a calling, but a tool in a brutal struggle. Sergius's relationship with a noblewoman named Marozia, a member of the powerful Theophylact family, truly defined his pontificate. Chroniclers say he took her as his mistress while she was still young, and together they had a son, who would later become pope himself as John XI. Yes, for a time, a pope fathered another pope, and although there were whispers in the city, nobody dared challenge his authority. He ruled strictly, even restoring the memory of previously disgraced popes, only to erase their honor again out of revenge. Church offices were sold off, supporters filled every key position, and the Vatican was transformed into a den of family intrigue, business deals, and sometimes even personal vendettas. Sergius's reign cracked the dignity of the papacy, making it less a beacon of spirituality and more a private business for the Roman elite. He died in 911, powerful and feared, though rarely respected. His time marked the start of nearly 60 years where the Holy See belonged to one family, their story steeped in manipulation, desire, and inherited influence. Next, we come to Pope Boniface VIII, the pope who claimed to be the ruler of the world. When Boniface became pope in 1294, he inherited a divided church left by a resigned predecessor. Humility, however, was foreign to him. He saw church leadership as the seat of power. He claimed supremacy over kings and nations, even writing in his famous decree, Unam Sanctum, that obedience to the Pope was necessary for salvation, placing himself above all rulers. His fierce opposition to the French king, Philip IV, led to a showdown. When Boniface tried to interfere with French taxes, Philip hit back with charges of heresy and corruption. It ended in violence. In 1303, armed followers of the French king entered Boniface's residence, striking him in the face and humiliating him. He was held captive for 3 days, released, and died not long after, some say out of anger and disgrace. Enemies later dug up his body, claiming it smelled of sulfur, and the poet Dante placed him in the deepest circles of hell, reserved for corrupt religious leaders. Boniface VIII is remembered as the pope who took pride to its highest extremes, nearly destroying respect for the papacy. His story warns of the dangers when sacred power is used without humility. Pope Innocent III is a case of a different kind of corruption, not personal pleasure, but the dangerous spread of holy war. Rising to the papacy in 1198, he used the church not for indulgence, but to expand its power with violence. Under his direction, the Fourth Crusade was launched, its stated purpose to recapture the Holy Land. But instead, the Crusaders turned on the Christian city of Constantinople, looting and destroying, claiming thousands of lives in God's name. Perhaps worse was his crusade against heretics closer to home. In southern France, the Cathars, a group with different beliefs, were declared enemies. Instead of debate, Innocent sent soldiers. The result was tragedy. In one city, when asked how to tell ally from heretic, the answer was chilling: kill them all. Tens of thousands died under his rule, sometimes without reason or mercy. The seeds for the later Inquisition were planted. He died in 1216, satisfied with his efforts, but his legacy stands as one of intolerance and violence. Someone who turned faith into a weapon, using banners of purity as justification for bloodshed. Far away in the ancient lands where present-day Iraq lies quiet, once stood Babylon, a city of wonder. Its temples and palaces towered, its gates gleamed with color, and the city bustled with life. At Babylon's center, legend speaks of a marvel, the Hanging Gardens, a paradise upon terraces, lush with plants and cool waters, looking as though nature itself had been raised into the sky. These gardens were said to overflow with greenery, palm trees, fragrant herbs, vines tumbling over stone, and water drawn from the river below. They appeared like a man-made mountain, a miracle of determination and skill, a feat worthy of being called one of the world's 7 wonders. And yet, their existence has always been shrouded in mystery. No clay tablets from Babylon, no official inscriptions, no firm archaeological evidence has ever been found. All we know comes from later Greek and Roman writers who described the gardens with awe, but from beyond Babylon's golden age, were these gardens real? Could such grandeur truly disappear without a trace, or were they nothing more than a beautiful story? The legend captivates not just because it is mysterious, but because it is so filled with hope. The tale that a mighty king created a garden out of love to comfort a queen who missed her green homeland. This story lingers in poetry, in art, in quiet dreams that somewhere, deep beneath the ruins, roots may still rest unseen. Perhaps the gardens have been lost, or perhaps they never existed, but the mystery endures, as alive as ever. To understand more, we have to look at Babylon itself. Set along the Euphrates, in what is now Iraq, it was more than just a place. It was a statement of strength, Its towering walls and glowing gates made it the heart of its empire. At the forefront was King Nebuchadnezzar II, who reigned in the 6th century BCE and is most often said to have created the Hanging Gardens. He rebuilt Babylon as a city of unparalleled grandeur, palaces, temples, and ziggurats climbing towards the sky. But among these solid achievements, one tale stands out. The claim that Nebuchadnezzar, having married a woman from the distant green hills of Media, saw her longing for her old home. Out of love, he ordered a new kind of marvel, not merely a garden, but a mountain of greenery, layered like the hills she missed, filled with life where only dryness had reigned before. The legend is tender, almost too touching to be true, yet it continues through the ages. Greek historians who wrote centuries later, such as Strabo and Diodorus Siculus, provide the most famous accounts, describing a series of rising terraces, sophisticated irrigation, and a massive, lush oasis in the desert. But these writers spoke with authority despite never visiting Babylon themselves. Was the garden real? Or the most enchanting of all ancient stories? If the gardens existed, they were more than beautiful. They were an achievement of remarkable engineering. Imagine building a garden like a mountain, with tall trees growing atop stone, kept alive in hot, arid air. Gravity and drought posed challenges, but Greek accounts suggest the ancient Babylonians may have used something akin to the Archimedes screw, an early device for lifting water uphill, perhaps by rotating a spiral tube inside a casing. Such a tool could have kept water flowing from the great Euphrates to the highest plants. Everything would have needed constant upkeep, a living, working system out of sight beneath blossoms and leaves. From outside, the mountain garden may have seemed to grow as if by magic, a wonder unmatched anywhere else. Yet, for all its splendor entails, one thing makes the gardens so mysterious: the silence of Babylon's own record keepers. While Greeks and Romans described the place, no Babylonian writings confirm it. The Babylonians, famous for noting crops, taxes, and every stone laid, say nothing of a monumental garden. King Nebuchadnezzar left plenty of written boasts about his walls, temples, and palaces, but not a word about creating a paradise for his queen. It's an absence that matters. If it existed, why was such a marvel left unmentioned? Maybe the gardens were destroyed, lost before Greek writers ever saw Babylon. Others think the gardens belonged to another city, mistakenly placed in Babylon by outsiders who confused cities or stories. There's even evidence that Nineveh, ancient capital of Assyria, had its own remarkable gardens and irrigation, described in the records of King Sennacherib. Perhaps it was his garden that inspired Greek tales, with the stories shifting and growing over time. Still, myths, even if only dreamed, hold power. Though we lack Babylonian evidence, the Greek descriptions remain passionate and detailed. Strabo depicted platforms stacked high, water technology pulling from the Euphrates, and a garden floating above the land. Diodorus Siculus added further detail: paved walkways, irrigated channels, and the claim that a king built this place for a queen's comfort. All Greek and Roman sources, though, were repeating stories heard secondhand, written long after Babylon's prime. These could well have been exaggerated or muddled, yet the stories endured, becoming part of the legend of the world's wonders. Sometimes it matters less whether something can be proven, and more how much it inspires us to believe. So if not in Babylon, then where? A new theory emerged in the 20th century. Dr. Stephanie Dalley, a British expert in ancient civilizations, argued after decades of research that the Hanging Gardens were real, but mistakenly placed in the wrong city. Her careful studies led her to Nineveh, the Assyrian capital farther upriver, ruled by Sennacherib about a century before Nebuchadnezzar. In his own records, Sennacherib described beautiful palace gardens, fruit trees, and a massive aqueduct that carried mountain water from far away. He even mentioned the use of a water-lifting screw for irrigation. Perhaps what Greek writers described was actually based on Assyrian marvels in technology, later remembered as Babylonian. Daly also noted that Babylon could mean more than one place, sometimes simply a term for a great city or a gate of the gods. It's possible, then, that the wonder was not lost at all, only its true home mistaken over centuries. Whether in Babylon, Nineveh, or only in legend, the story of the Hanging Gardens is at its heart a story of love and compassion. Tradition holds that Nebuchadnezzar II did not create the gardens for pride or glory, but to ease the homesickness of his queen, a woman from distant, greener lands. Imagining her longing in a world of sun and dust, he ordered a new mountain to be built, a miracle of engineering, meant to echo the leafy hills she left behind. Architects, builders, and workers came together, raising this monument not out of conquest, but out of consideration and care. Even if no tablet records her name or her sorrow, the legend persists because it is easy to imagine a mighty king choosing to build not for himself, but to comfort another human being. This is perhaps why the Hanging Gardens, whether real or not, continue to fascinate. They stand for something rare, the use of great power for a tender purpose. A garden born not from ambition, but from affection. And if the gardens ever truly existed, where did they go? Most grand creations do not vanish in a single moment. They fade away slowly, bricks repurposed, sand drifting over buried remains, and time quietly washing away memories. Babylon, once the bright heart of Mesopotamia, was passed from empire to empire until only echoes remained. When Alexander the Great gazed at its ruins centuries later, he dreamed of restoring its glory, but even he could not bring it back. And so, whether the Hanging Gardens ever stood beneath the same stars that watch us now, or whether they have always lived in story, their magic endures, in wonder, in hope, and in the whispers of history. When the city lost its guiding protector, it was left to fade away. No one can say for certain when the famed gardens vanished. Maybe they were carefully taken apart. Perhaps they simply crumbled from being ignored. Or possibly, they were nothing more than tales spread by distant writers enchanted by a story too lovely to question. Through the 1800s and 1900s, excavators discovered the remains of Babylon's towering ziggurats and majestic palaces. Yet, no clear sign of the gardens has ever come to light. Their absence is deeply felt, much like the hollow left by a vanished tree, its roots gone, but the memory of its shade held on by those who once rested beneath it. If those gardens did stand in real life, they now live on in a different form, a truth shaped by longing, legend, and remembrance. We search among ruins for more than bricks or channels. We search for evidence that such beauty ever truly existed. We hope to find proof that even in ancient days, people dreamed of wonders reaching toward the sky. Maybe that's why their loss lingers. Not only because they're gone, but because it's possible they never existed at all. Still, we believe. The human mind, like a dry desert, is a place where old dreams can still take root and blossom. Whether fact or fancy, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon have claimed a special place in our collective story. There are no stones or walls for us to stand before, no carvings to run our fingers over, yet the gardens remain among the most beloved wonders of ancient times. Why is that? Perhaps it's because some marvels don't need soil and stone. They flourish in our imagination instead. The thought of a lush garden climbing high above the dusty plains, thriving because of ingenious inventions and gleaming with falling vines and flowers, it touches something deep within us. It calls to our desire to make beauty where it otherwise couldn't survive, to soften the edges of bare rock with life and hope. Maybe King Nebuchadnezzar built such a place. or perhaps it was shaped in the mind of a poet whose words were too enchanting to doubt. These stories remind us not just of what ancient hands could build, but of what ancient hearts yearned for. In a place surrounded by walls and struggle, someone hoped for green amid the gray. Someone pictured waterfalls, blossoms, and shade. Isn't that itself enough? Artists today paint these gardens. Storytellers describe them, engineers wonder how they might have been built, and filmmakers reimagine them in glowing colors, none having seen them, yet all believing they can almost touch them. We can close our eyes and feel cool stones beneath our feet, smell the sweet air filled with flowers, and hear the soft splash of water along the terraces. The gardens weren't created to be seized by force, but to be cherished and remembered. Their true immortality lies in the possibility itself. We sift through dust and puzzle over old records, hoping the gardens were real, when perhaps, in a deeper sense, they always have been, not in the earth of Babylon, but in the shared memory of countless dreamers. This vision has traveled from one generation to the next for over 2,000 years. In every way that truly matters, the gardens have never faded. They remain above us all, suspended in time, quietly thriving in the wonder and hope we carry. And now and then, when night falls and the world is hushed, we remember. Amid history's hottest deserts, something green once found a way to grow. Long before coins tinkled in purses or paper notes passed through busy markets, people had no formal money, but trade still took place. In these early days, bartering was common. People exchanged what they had for what they needed. A farmer with extra grain would swap it for fish. A potter might trade their bowls for cloth. This system relied on mutual need, but it was far from perfect. Imagine being a shepherd with a few goats, wanting some salt. If you found someone with salt who didn't want goats, the exchange would fall apart. This challenge is called the coincidence of wants, the trouble of finding a perfect match between what you have and what someone else desires. Small villages could manage, since everyone knew each other, but as towns grew larger and societies became more complex, bartering turned slow and awkward. People needed something everyone could trust as valuable, something enduring, easy to carry, and difficult to copy. Early communities began using objects that met these needs. Sometimes it was livestock. A goat might be traded for chickens or grain. In other places, salt was precious, so much so that the word salary comes from the Latin salarium, for the salt used to pay Roman soldiers. Still, other cultures valued tools or weapons, stone axes, bronze blades, not always for use, but because their worth was widely recognized. These things were not money as we see it now, but they bridged the gap between bartering and money by allowing value to be measured and saved. They introduced the idea that worth could be stored and later exchanged. Before coins with stamped numbers or faces existed, people relied on a simple but powerful truth. Trade works only when trust exists. Early forms of currency were little more than promises made real by necessity. As bartering became unmanageable on a larger scale, people started agreeing on certain items to represent value. Objects chosen not for their practical use, but because their worth was universal within the community. This was the origin of what's known as proto-currency, the first true stand-ins for money. One of the most widespread early forms was the cowrie shell. Tiny, smooth, and beautiful, these shells came from the faraway seas of the Indian and Pacific Oceans. Because they were hard to fake and easy to move, cowries spread from Africa to China, used for trading and even as part of wedding customs. In some African kingdoms, bags of cowries were stored in royal vaults like treasure. In early China, bronze copies of cowries were made and passed around as coins. But cowries weren't alone. In ancient Mesopotamia, people used weighed pieces of silver, not coins, just lumps sized and measured for exchange. Merchants carried scales to weigh silver shekels, and contracts recorded these amounts, even though no two pieces looked the same. Across the ocean in the Americas, the Aztecs counted, stored, and traded cacao beans as money. Sometimes 10 beans would buy a rabbit, 100 a small cloak. In the Philippines, gold rings called pelonitos were traded in markets long before outsiders arrived. In regions of Africa, iron tools were used, accepted more for their steady value than their immediate usefulness. What all these early systems had in common was the recognition that value could be abstract. It didn't need to be linked to immediate need, but could stand for trust, work, or safety. This changed the way people dealt with each other. Now, you could accept something of value and know you would be able to trade it for something you wanted later on. Value started to flow, not just between people, but through tokens, shells, and metal. Money became a language everyone could speak. As trade continued to grow and networks stretched across countries, the need for better, more dependable money became urgent. Cowrie shells, beans, and lumps of silver worked, but only up to a point. Societies came to need money that everyone trusted, something more than an object, something with a recognized authority behind it. This shift changed the course of economic history. Metals such as gold, silver, copper, and bronze had always been rare, lasting and easy to shape. But for a long time, each piece had to be weighed and examined before use. One region's silver might be doubted in the next. People soon began shaping metals into set forms, bars, rings, and at last, coins. The breakthrough wasn't just the uniform shape. It was the official seal. The earliest known coins appeared around 600 BCE, made by the Kingdom of Lydia in what is now Turkey. These were formed from electrum, a gold and silver mixture, and stamped with a symbol, such as a lion, showing the ruler's guarantee. Now a coin meant more than its metal weight. It carried the credibility of the king. These marked coins made trading easier. They were trusted everywhere because people believed everyone else would accept them too. This clever idea quickly spread. Greek cities, the Persian Empire, Rome, India, and China all began to mint their own coinage, each with unique images and marks showing pride, authority, and trust. Rulers put their faces, legends, and gods on coins, not just as decoration, but as a message of power and identity. Every transaction with a coin was an acknowledgement. This holds value because we believe, and because those in power stand behind it. With official coinage, the idea of money advanced. Now, value was not only in precious materials, but in agreed meaning. The true worth of a coin was the shared trust of a society. As centuries passed, no civilization refined the use of coins like the Romans. For Rome, money was deeply tied to empire. By the time of the Republic, coins were a daily part of ordinary life. Romans developed a system based on bronze, silver, and eventually gold as their resources expanded. Their earliest coins were simple lumps of bronze, but as time went on, they produced carefully crafted, marked coins, each with significance and purpose. The silver denarius grew to be one of the best-known coins, used for army wages, public expenses, and every kind of trade. On one side was often a figure or symbol of victory, and on the other, the face of the emperor himself. In this way, money became not just economic, but political. It placed the ruler's image into every hand, every pocket, with each use a quiet reminder of who governed. Roman money was also remarkably varied, with coins minted in different places and made from several types of metal. As the empire expanded, Rome took over other systems, turning local money into Roman coins, bringing uniformity to trade across a vast territory. Over time, though, problems grew. As wars and corruption wore at the empire, the government lessened the amount of precious metal in coins, weakening their value. This eroded trust and brought about inflation, but still, Roman coins traveled widely, farther than the armies themselves. Coins ended up buried in distant lands, symbols of an empire's reach. Even after Rome fell, their coins remained, carrying a simple but lasting truth. Whoever controls money shapes the world around them. In the East, the path of money was both distinct and enduring. Early Chinese coins were not round at first. They were shaped like tools, reflecting the importance of farming and craft. As trade needs grew, shapes changed. Round coins with square holes became the standard. These could be strung together for use or storage. The round coin was a symbol of the heavens, the square hole of the earth, each transaction linking cosmic balance to daily life. Chinese coins were typically bronze, stamped with words showing their maker and the new dynasty. Unlike Rome's, Chinese coins stayed nearly unchanged in shape for ages, creating a sense of stability. South of China, India developed its own system. As early as the 6th century BCE, people there used small silver fragments marked with symbols instead of faces, sun, elephant, or mountain, connecting the value of money to nature, faith, and power. Throughout Asia, trade routes like the Silk Road carried coins, ideas, and goods from China to the Mediterranean. Coins from many empires, Chinese, Persian, Roman, passed through countless hands, traced in sand and over great mountains. Money in the East was more than an instrument of buying and selling. Coins could become sacred, used in rituals, never spent, but offered or buried in honor. Through rising and falling dynasties, coins held fast as carriers of history, passing silent messages over the centuries. Then, after more than 1,000 years of metal coins, a quiet revolution took place, not in the West, but in China. Merchants and scholars dared to imagine money that was weightless, written instead of stamped. In the Tang period, around the 7th century CE, the first paper notes were used, not by the government, but by trusted business people. Travelers preferred these slips to hauling heavy coins. The idea was simple: a note as a promise, easily exchanged for its value in silver elsewhere. Soon, officials began to see the benefits. By the 11th century, during the Song dynasty, the world's first government-backed paper money appeared. These new notes came with seals and set expiration dates, along with intricate designs to ward off imitators. They were light and simple to carry and helped large-scale trade move faster and farther than ever before. A global leap made centuries before paper currency came to Europe. While Europeans still paid with coins, the Chinese paid with printed mulberry bark. Paper money relied on trust in a way coins did not. Its value rested on shared belief rather than precious metal. In times of trouble, if paper money was overprinted or confidence was lost, its worth could collapse overnight. Still, the innovation endured. Later, under the rule of the Yuan dynasty, backed by the vast Mongol Empire, government notes were used across many lands, even printed in different languages. When travelers like Marco Polo saw this system, they were amazed. He described it in wonder, likening it to turning paper into gold. But the Chinese understood. The essence of money was no longer just physical. Its value was born in agreement, in trust passed quietly from person to person. As trade routes grew longer and economies more intricate, even carrying paper or coin began to seem too risky, too slow. Merchants needed something safer and more convenient, a new way to store wealth and move value across distances. This need gave rise to another great invention: the bank. The roots of banking are deep, stretching back to the ancient world in lands like Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Greece. But as societies grew, especially in the Islamic world and Renaissance Italy, banking became an institution in itself. In the busy cities of Baghdad, Cairo, Venice, and Florence, rich merchant families started giving loans, offering places to keep money and granting credit. A trader in Cairo, for instance, might leave gold with a banker, get a written receipt, and use that slip to claim his money hundreds of miles away. This was much like the checks and letters of credit still used today. The most powerful banks were run not by governments, but by influential families who managed the flow of money for journeys, armies, and entire countries. They didn't just hold wealth, they helped shape it, send it elsewhere, even grow it beyond its original form. At the center of banking was a revolutionary idea. Money could exist as a promise, not a thing. You didn't need to have coins in a box. You could hold a note or a place in a book, and that could be traded, loaned, or spent. With this came the idea of credit, faith that a debt would be paid later. Before long, much of the world's trade ran not on metal or shells, but on trust and confidence. Banks wrote letters of credit, created written money, and even added to the total supply by lending out deposits. Through banking, fortunes moved faster than caravans. Entire new forms of wealth were born from simple trust, not just from the digging of gold. Of course, this system could also bring trouble. Defaults, fraud, and crashes were now possible. But with money as a record, not just as a physical thing, the future could not go backwards. Today, when you tap a card, use your phone to buy a coffee, or send money across continents with a swipe, you're part of this legacy. There's often no bill, no coin, just numbers and lines of code zipping across an invisible network. Yet the transaction is very real. Currency has become digital, moving at the speed of light, buying stocks, funding ideas, or paying rents without ever passing through anyone's fingers. Bit by bit, the use of cash is fading from everyday life. With a digital account, your money is not in your hands, but safely recorded on a distant server, tracked and updated instantly. We have now entered the age of invisible money. From the shells and metals of olden days, currency has become code, managed by online banks, sent through apps, and even transformed into new digital forms. Cryptocurrencies push the idea even further. They exist only as information on vast networks, verified not by kings or banks, but by mathematics and by the people participating. No one holds a physical Bitcoin. It's simply there on the blockchain, confirmed by computers scattered across the globe. Despite all this change, the nature of money remains the same. Whether in a handful of salt, a shining coin, a piece of paper, or a string of code, money works because we believe. It's a silent agreement stretching through history, an understanding that what we hold or see on a screen can be traded for life's needs and wants. In this sense, money is a tale as old as humanity, a story written in the enduring desire to trust, trade, and find worth in something beyond ourselves. Among the old legends spilling from Greece, no figure glows brighter or casts a longer shadow than Helen, she whose face was said to launch 1,000 ships. Ancient poets claimed she was the daughter of Zeus, and unlike other mortals, she was born not from a human mother, but from an egg. Her beauty, it was said, was so rare and captivating that it could topple cities and spark wars. Helen became the queen of Sparta, married to King Menelaus. When the Trojan prince Paris arrived, some tell that he stole her away, while others believe she went willingly. Either way, as his ship's sails slipped beyond the horizon, the order of the world was thrown into upheaval. Menelaus, angry and wounded, called all of Helen's former suitors to honor the oath they had sworn, to defend the winner of Helen's hand no matter what. Under banners of loyalty and revenge, Greece became united. Kings gathered their ships. Among them were Agamemnon, powerful ruler of Mycenae, clever Odysseus from Ithaca, and Achilles, the half-divine warrior whose name would outlast centuries. They sailed to Troy, a city famed for its riches and high walls. For 10 years the battle raged beneath Troy's towers. Heroes fell, the gods themselves took sides. Zeus, Hera, Apollo, Athena, all turning the conflict into a stage for their own rivalries. The story is filled with fury, loss, and tricks, like the wooden horse that finally broke the city's defenses. This is the tale long carried by the poets, a drama full of courage, pride, and sorrow. But what is the truth behind the myth? For generations, historians doubted the story's reality, considering it simply a beautiful tale woven by artists like Homer, who wrote his epic The Iliad centuries after the supposed war. Yet there is a stubborn thread of reality within the legend. The city of Troy was not simply the stuff of dreams. It existed, buried beneath a Turkish hill. In the late 1800s, a German researcher named Heinrich Schliemann set out to find it. Beneath the mound, he discovered layers of ancient ruins. Not just one city, but several built one atop the next. Schliemann dug with passion, sometimes too quickly. He was convinced he'd found King Priam's treasure, and famously photographed his wife wearing these ancient golden pieces. Later, scholars realized Schliemann had gone too deep. The layer he believed was Homer's Troy was actually from a much older time. But other layers, built between 1300 and 1200 BCE, fit the late Bronze Age, the very era when legend holds the siege took place. In those layers, the remains of high walls, great towers, and signs of fire and collapse are still found. Some suggest it was destroyed by an earthquake or civil strife rather than battle. Yet many experts now agree. Beneath Hizarlik lie the real ruins of Troy, a prize city that ruled over important trade routes, a place well worth fighting over. The war itself, if it happened, may not have mirrored Homer's every word, but the bones of truth remain. While Troy's story would be incomplete without an enemy, the Greeks who set sail for its shores emerged from the powerful Mycenaean civilization, the dominant force of mainland Greece from around 1600 to 1100 BCE. Their world was one of grand stone palaces, rich tombs, and detailed records. The hilltop palace at Mycenae was said to be ruled by Agamemnon, leader of the Greeks. For them, life was built on the strength of kingship and weaponry. Mycenaean art is filled with images of chariots and warriors. Their society wasn't a loose alliance, but a network of firm rulers and administrators. The Mycenaeans were master traders, with pottery found as far as Egypt and even near Troy. They were both merchants and warriors, seeking influence over rich cities across the Aegean and Eastern lands. In their script, known as Linear B, we see clear signs of a top-down system, listings of tributes, weapons, and supplies. Though there is no explicit mention of a Trojan War in their writings, these records open a window onto a world where such conflict was entirely believable. Perhaps the real fight was not over beauty or love, but over power, trade, and access to valuable routes, a clash of ambition and timing. It's possible the Greeks did cross the sea and lay siege to a mighty city, and that with every retelling the story grew, becoming the legend we know. We must try to imagine how ancient Greeks themselves understood these events. For them, myth and reality were woven together, not separated by clear lines. The stories of Achilles, Hector, and Helen were not just entertainment. They were the foundation for pride and self-understanding. In their poems, gods did not stand aside, but stepped onto the battlefield, shaping outcomes with every whim. This wasn't just a clever plot device. It reflected a belief that the divine worked through human lives. But beneath the divine drama are stories of deeply human feeling, of rage, pride, loss, and hope. Achilles, though often seen as a near god, still struggles with grief and questions the cost of his quest for fame. Hector, Troy's great defender, is both hero and family man, fighting with the knowledge that defeat is likely. These stories, despite their ancient roots, feel alive and close to us. Who then were these heroes? There's no evidence for an actual Achilles or Helen, but certain names, like Alexandros, another term for Paris, appear in old Anatolian writings. It's likely that if there was a war, the real participants looked less like painted legends and more like determined leaders and fighters, seeking survival and victory. Yet, over generations, the memory was changed, given a new shape by poets, told as much to inspire as to remember. The Trojan War became a mirror, reflecting what the Greeks valued, feared, and dreamed. This is where myth does what simple history cannot. Let us feel truth, even when we cannot know it for certain. The Fall of Troy is the tale's most famous act, centered on the masterful trick of the wooden horse. Unable to storm the city outright, the Greeks built a giant horse as a supposed offering, then pretended to sail away, hiding their best fighters inside. The Trojans, weary and desperate to believe victory was theirs, drew the horse inside their gates. In the dead of night, the Greeks emerged from their hiding place, opened the gates, and let their army in. Troy was taken, its king killed, temples destroyed, city burned and emptied. Did this actually happen? Archaeologists have found that one layer of Troy was indeed destroyed in a sudden and violent way around 1180 BCE. There are burn marks, collapsed structures, even arrowheads. It fits the legend's timing and tone. But there's no trace of a giant horse, nor records of such a cunning trick. Some believe the horse was simply a symbol, a misunderstood siege machine, or perhaps a poetic stand-in for inner betrayal or unexpected disaster. There may never have been a Trojan horse in flesh and wood, but as a symbol it stands for sharpness of mind and the pain of defeat. Whether a confounding engine or poetic image, the horse's story marks a turning point. After Troy's destruction, other mighty cities of the Bronze Age soon collapsed. Networks broke apart, cultures shifted, languages faded away. The Trojan War might have been the last echo before a great silence. The horse, real or not, became the door through which the ancient world stepped into memory and legend. For the Greeks, the war did not end with Troy's fall. The suffering and journeys of the survivors continued to echo. The poet Homer's Odyssey tells how Odysseus, weary and battered, spent years struggling home, battling monsters and yearning for peace. Other heroes met their ends. Agamemnon murdered by his own wife, Ajax ending his life in despair. Menelaus reunited with Helen in a love strained by loss. And there was also Aeneas, a Trojan prince who in Roman myth escaped the ruins with his father and young son. Told by Virgil in the Aeneid, Aeneas's journey took him to Italy, where his descendants were said to found Rome. This story gave the Romans not just pride, but a sense of connection to the heroic past. They were not mere survivors, but heirs to those who endured. In this way, Troy's story rippled outward, spreading across cultures and generations. Cities and dynasties claimed Trojan roots, inventing stories to explain their beginnings. So what does this reveal? The importance of Troy was never just about a battle. Its fall became a symbol for endurance, transformation, and the cycles of rise and ruin. Through this symbol, entire societies found meaning and claimed their place in a changing world. As the centuries passed, the war story was retold, shaped for new ages. In ancient Greece, plays and poetry wrestled with Helen's fate, with questions of honor and blame. Was the war fought for love or for pride? Athens and Sparta used the tales to build identity, to examine their own times through the lens of the past. Later, after Greece's glory faded, Rome picked up the tale, claiming descent not from the Greeks, but from Troy, casting themselves as the noble victims who had risen to greatness instead of being bitter, vanquished. Julius Caesar laid claim to a mythical Trojan ancestor in Aeneas, hoping to root his own power deeper. Myth served as a tool, a way to shape belief and justify rule. And even now, we still return to Troy. Each generation tells the war anew. Artists paint it. Writers reinterpret the heroes and the struggle. Filmmakers bring it alive for modern eyes. Achilles shifts from bold to tragic. Helen becomes a figure trapped by forces larger than herself. Paris is seen as uncertain. Odysseus is sometimes wise, sometimes cold. Each new telling changes the story yet again, except for one constant: the burning city by the sea, holding our longing and sorrow and pride. In the end, myth becomes more than memory. It becomes a mirror showing not just what happened, but what each age hopes and fears. The Trojan War endures not because we have proof, but because we feel its truth in different ways. We ask if the war really happened, but perhaps what we're seeking is something deeper, meaning woven into our shared past, our hopes, our regrets. We may never be certain whether Helen walked Troy's walls or Achilles fought below them. No tablet records his name. No tomb has yielded his shining armor. Yet the story will not let go. We return to its themes of honor, loss, and memory. Something did happen on that hallowed ground. A city rose, a conflict took place, and out of that turmoil came a story powerful enough to shape entire cultures. So did the Trojan War happen? Yes, and no. Not exactly as we picture, but not as pure fiction either. Somewhere in between legend and fact, the war has become a symbol, a place where memory, history, and hope meet, giving birth to tales that will outlast any stone wall or buried sword. If Troy is gone, its story is not. We still feel its echoes, alive in the questions and dreams we carry through time.